The worst thing you can say to someone that's stressed, relax.
Oh, I was just about to, I'm so glad you went there. I was like, literally, that is the trigger for like high five in the face with a chair. It's
yeah. Chronic anxiety is where it doesn't go away. And the problem is we adapt. I think one of the most important things that we all should do is watch our internal dialogue. Look at how you're talking to yourself. You're being a complete bitch to yourself.
Abusive.
You're being nasty.
Yeah.
The inability to actually sit with uncomfortable feelings is one of the biggest problems that we have.
Hello and welcome to Unstoppable. I'm your host, Kerwin, and today we talk to Leanne Hall, who is the author of Head First, Health Fast. Now, Leanne has an interesting story. She worked extensively for Channel 10 as their mind-body expert on the Living Room and Studio 10, but she's also got a master's degree in clinical psychology, qualifications in nutrition, fitness, and is currently completing a doctorate in natural medicine. So the chick's a bit smart, let's just say that. But in this episode, we actually dug deep into talking about anxiety. Why is it at epidemic levels? And how is anxiety linked to stress and addiction, and how actually nutrition can help? We talked about the symptoms and illnesses of anxiety and where it comes from, how to deal with anxiety, what holds people back from dealing with their anxiety, but more importantly, how do we regulate and teach our children how to regulate? So for those of you who have ever dealt with anxiety or panic attacks, okay, or you're just a little bit nervous, this is one you're going to want to check out. Leanne Hall, listen up. This episode is brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for businesses. If you have ever wanted to grow your business faster than what you can right now, if you need to make more revenue, if you need more leads, if you need more clients, if you need to know how to plan your business in a strategic way in order to hit big goals, if you need to learn how to scale your business and grow your team and your business so that you have more freedom, then this program is for you. Imagine 3 days immersed with me where we cover all aspects of business, but we do it from an immersive but also an execution standpoint. We execute every step of the way. And we're looking at 5 key areas. We're looking at your psychology. We're looking at your marketing, your sales, your leadership, and we're looking at your planning and how we integrate these 5 key areas to grow your business and your brand quickly. So if you'd like to find out more information, kerwinray.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is an absolute honour and a pleasure to welcome Leanne Hall. Leanne, great to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
I'm so glad. I'm excited that you're excited, and excitement is always good because that normally produces some incredible results. But I'm curious, for those people who've never heard of you before, what is the Leanne Hall story? Who are you, and what do you do?
I'm lots of things, as we all are.
I saw this. Like you're a clinical psychologist, you're a nutritionist, and a nutritionist, is that right?
Well, I'm a nutrition coach. I have to be very careful. And even clinical psychologist, there's lots of restrictions about what you can actually call yourself. But I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. Yep. I do have qualifications in nutrition and fitness as well. So,
So it's almost like you've got the psychology, you've got the food, and you've got the training. So you were a personal trainer, or you've got qualifications around training as well?
I've got qualifications around training. I don't do one-on-one personal training. I kind of did that because a lot of the young people I was seeing at the time with eating disorders, body image issues, they were seeing trainers and doing exercise programs that I instinctively thought, no, I don't agree with it. But I wasn't qualified at that point to comment. So I thought, well, if I'm actually going to be able to comment and coach these young people with this stuff, then I actually need to know what I'm talking about. Plus, I was interested in it myself anyway. That's why I went back and did that.
So your roots are in psychology?
Yep.
How did you get into psychology in the first place?
I was thinking about that. I don't know. I think it's just something I've always...
Well, let me psychoanalyse you and find out.
Oh, juice. I think probably I've always been interested in why people do what they do.
Yeah, right.
So even as a teenager, I think I had various things happen to me in my life.
Was it an external reference? Like, I'm curious as to why people do what they do. Or was it internal? Like, why do I do this? Like, or was it a combination of both?
I think when I was young, it was definitely external.
Yep.
And then as I got older, it was more internal.
Yeah,
so I started to become aware that, maybe I've got some anxious traits, and maybe that's why I do this, and maybe that's why I do that. So it started off very external. My dad left when I was 13 and ruined my mum, and I went into that kind of thing of how can I help her and how can I understand this? And then I guess through my own life, noticing that I have anxious traits myself and that kind of thing, I thought, well, I want to understand me too. And I want to be able to work on those things so that I can kind of not get rid of it, but live with it.
And learn how to regulate and deal with it better.
That's right, yeah.
You know, it's interesting, we've gone there already. Anxiety seems to be, whenever we do a video on anxiety on social media, it always goes bang every single time. And it seems like anxiety is, like, because stress for a long time was this buzzword that we were using, and the cost of stress and the effects of stress. But now we're kind of starting to look at anxiety as one of those things that's very obviously incredibly linked, intrinsically linked to stress.
Oh, very much.
But have you seen in your own practice that anxiety is something that is becoming almost too, and I choose my words very carefully here, but I do want to carry a little bit of punch, but it almost feels like it's at epidemic levels.
I would agree completely. Anxiety is the most common mental health issue of this decade and the decade before it, I think, too. And I think part of it is that busyness that we all kind of seem to have, and the stress that is almost a status symbol.
Yeah, right.
If you're stressed, it means that you're successful.
Yeah.
If you're not stressed, that means you're lazy. So there's a lot of sort of meaning that we have around even the terms stress and anxiety. But anxiety, I would say, without a doubt, I mean, the statistics would say sort of 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 4, I would say 1 in 2. At some point in our life, 1 in 2, I would think, are going to have some issue with anxiety, whether it's short-term or long-term. But it is, without a doubt, one of the biggest problems of our society, I think.
And I would say it's even greater because a lot of it is probably, I think there's a lot of people that live with anxiety and it's undiagnosed.
100%, yes.
Because I know for me personally, I experienced a lot of trauma when I was younger. Didn't actually recognise it as trauma, just thought it was an experience. But then I just grew up with this sensation of constantly feeling on edge, constantly feeling in this state of immense, and in some cases, movement stopping fear. And it wasn't until I got to a point where I actually sat down with a therapist. He's like, what you're experiencing right now is actually anxiety. And I was like, no, it's not. That's just how I am.
Yeah.
So for people who are listening to this, a lot of people would be able to relate to anxiety. Some people probably over-diagnose if, Dr. fucking Google.
Yeah.
But what is anxiety?
So anxiety, well, for a start, we can't get rid of it. Yeah. It's normal and we have to have it. So if we weren't anxious, then we wouldn't survive as a species. And part of what's made us survive... It is a survival mechanism. Absolutely, it is. So fight or flight, we absolutely need it. But the problem with our society today is those mechanisms that generate that anxious response don't switch off for a lot of people. So
because once upon a time, the saber-toothed tiger was outside the cave.
Exactly right.
And now it lives in our head.
Now it's in our head, and our body has trouble differentiating what's real and what's not, particularly when it comes to those kind of powerful, anxious thoughts. So that's a problem, that it's not like, oh, I'm stressed about an exam or I've got a job interview, and then that stressor passes and then we feel okay. Chronic anxiety is where it doesn't go away. And the problem is we adapt. We just somehow seem to adapt, most of us, and we acclimatise to it. And before you know it, it hits us and comes out of nowhere, usually in the form of physical symptoms.
Yeah.
So, the physical and the mental, I don't even think they're different things. I think they are the same thing. So anxiety is often felt in the body before we're actually even aware that we're experiencing it.
So if someone's like listening to this and they're thinking, well, how do I know if I've got anxiety? Where's the first place that they would tune into? Where's the first place they would look?
Well, I think internally, I think you need to look at what your body's telling you, because I think a lot of people that have chronic anxiety, like I said, they tend to dissociate from the emotional stuff because it's uncomfortable. So I guess that's the other thing. When we feel something uncomfortable, and anxiousness and stress are very uncomfortable emotions. So our instinct is to avoid it. Yeah. So I think sometimes what happens then is we'll notice that there might be weight gain, there might be weight loss, there might be digestive symptoms, irritable bowel syndrome. There might be other health indicators that are telling us that something's actually not wrong. And that's a very, very strong tap on the shoulder.
And you just mentioned another condition there, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, Crohn's disease. These also appear to be things that are, rising at dramatic rates as well.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that oftentimes we look at IBS as an example, we look at it in isolation. We look at it as a condition within the body. We don't actually realise that there's a possible link between the body and obviously what's going on in the mind.
Absolutely. There's a complete link. I mean, there's an actual cranial nerve that links from our brain to our gut. So there is a conversation happening all the time without us even knowing it, and it's bidirectional. So our gut's always talking to our brain's always talking to our gut. So that's kind of happening behind the scenes all the time. So
anxiety, it manifests obviously in the mind first. And is it the relationship with stimulus? Like, is it with our relationship with what's happening, and whether or not we determine it's something good or something bad, and that determines whether it creates anxiety or not?
Yeah, it's usually fear-based. So it's usually based on our fears of what might happen. And the what-if syndrome is the classic example. What if this, what if that? So that's often the thing that causes that chronic type of anxiety. It's that inability to really kind of stay present, and that propensity that most people have, really, to focus on future events, imagined future events, worst-case scenario, what if. And that could be based on past experience, but nearly always it's an avoidance of the present and a focus on the future or the past.
Okay. And when people are dealing with anxiety, obviously there's good ways to deal with anxiety and there are bad ways to deal with anxiety. And again, we also seem to be seeing epidemic levels of addiction. Addiction is something that is, and once upon a time, addiction was something that was very much categorized to, certain substances. But now we're seeing process addictions. We're seeing things like people are addicted to social media, people are addicted to their phone, people are addicted to sex. Do you think that there is a link between addiction and anxiety?
Yep. I think a lot of it is avoidance. I think avoidance. I guess that's the thing I bang on about quite a lot, that in our society today, we avoid discomfort. So we turn to other things to distract us and to kind of make us not think of that. So whether it's an addiction, whatever it might be, I think the inability to actually sit with uncomfortable feelings is one of the biggest problems that we have. And I think that generates a lot of anxiety because we're pushing things to the side, but it doesn't go away. It just kind of sits there.
Yeah, right.
And then we're in this constant battle of trying to avoid things and trying to not listen to those thoughts and pretend they're not there. And, that just generates so much internal distress for a lot of people.
So how do we deal with anxiety? So if you're telling us it doesn't go away, how do we deal with anxiety in a healthy way?
I think we've got to stop demonising it for a start. And I know Sarah Wilson's written a beautiful book, and she's absolutely spot on when she says we've got to stop demonising anxiety and stress as bad. It's not bad. What we need to do is learn to actually accept it as part of our life and to just learn from it. So an anxious feeling is usually telling us that something might not be right. So the first thing we need to do is actually sit with it and work out, what is this feeling? Where am I feeling it? And why am I feeling it? And that why mightn't come to you straight away. You might have to sit with it for a little while to work it out. Sometimes you won't work it out. But the most important thing is to not run from those feelings, not avoid them, but to actually sit through them. And often what happens is you'll work out, I think I'm actually feeling like this because of X or because of Y, or something in my life isn't quite right at the moment. And then you can develop an action plan on how to deal with it. But it's not about avoiding that feeling. It's about using it to tell you what's going on, because emotions are there to inform us. We can learn from them, not avoid them. So
it's almost like you're suggesting a form of exposure therapy, whereby let's not try and avoid this feeling. Let's actually expose ourselves to it. Let's be vulnerable to it. Let's accept it as a reality.
Yeah.
And then let's maybe perhaps find out what it's linked to. Yeah. What's the trigger for anxiety? Why am I feeling this way? And because it's probably fair to say that there's practical anxiety, which is the stuff that's going to save us from walking off a cliff or walking in front of a bus or doing something stupid.
Yeah.
And then there's impractical anxiety, the stuff that prevents us from fulfilling our goals and chasing our dreams. And how do we distinguish between the difference between the two?
Well, I think the former, I guess, the answers often come to you in terms of what's making you anxious. I think if you're talking about that chronic anxiety that's probably maladaptive, usually that's been creeping up on someone and the symptoms have been there for a while, and no matter what you do, they don't seem to go away. So that's when, and often you do need a professional to actually sit with you and try and untangle that. And is that
where in some cases it's trauma related?
It can be, very much, it can be. And some of us we overvalue the opinions of others. So we're very self-critical, for example, or, so we're constantly caught up in that idea of not being good enough or fear of failure or whatever it is. So, often there is... Often it resonates with those core beliefs and those core values that we have and those core fears that we have, that we mightn't be good enough, or, I'm unlovable, or I'm a failure. So I think once you kind of know what those, and we all have them, every single one of us has them. And look, it does take a little bit of introspection and it takes a little bit of reflection, and I think we're not used to that. I think we're very, very much used to kind of focusing outwards. So that inward stuff can be really confronting, and I think for people, if it does feel confronting, there's no harm in saying I need some assistance and I need some professional help. It could just be a few sessions with someone to actually just unpack it, look at it and move on.
I think therapy, I highly recommend everyone. I've been doing it for a while. I think it's, everyone should have someone that they can speak to. But what's interesting, when we look at stress and anxiety and those things that are linked together, I've done a lot of work with elite professional athletes and also elite special forces, and the way that they approach stress conditioning is really quite interesting. Again, it's not the avoidance, it's the exposure to, and the gradual increase in the gradual increase of dosage to a point where there's almost just a level of immunity. Why do you think so many people just don't even want to go there? Like, what is it that prevents people even going, well, I can sit with this, but I'd rather drink a beer. I'd rather have sex. I'd rather get on social media. I'd rather, whatever their thing is. Why do you think people just don't want to go there?
Because people want to feel good now. And can I just say, you've just touched on my absolute passion of where I'm headed now in my research, is looking at elite athletes and endurance runners, and that idea that they have this incredible ability to kind of sit through suffering and discomfort for long periods of time. But I think for most of us, and, they represent a very small kind of end of the niche, don't they? But really, I think it's all about now. Whatever makes me feel good now. And I think the inability, and even delayed gratification. I was talking to my in-laws the other day. Like even I, when I was young, all those years ago, when I used to, Madonna came out with a new CD.
She's saying this and she's 21, ladies and gentlemen.
No, 21. Madonna came out with a new CD, and I remember having to save up for weeks to get this CD. And I sat there and I counted my pennies, and I had to put off actually getting it. Now, what happens when you like a song? You just download it. It's there. It's now. It's instant. So I think there's this idea that, you know, pleasure is instant, and it should. I should feel good all the time. I should feel happy all the time, and it's just not true.
Yeah.
I think we forget how much learning and growth comes from sitting with the discomfort and the uncomfortable stuff.
I personally found, you know, pain is one of the greatest awakeners. You know? You know, it really is one of the things that wakes up. But, you know, you mentioned something about the endurance runners and such a small percentage of people that can do that. But what's interesting when you compare it to elite professional athletes, or again, one of my passions is, you know, really understanding the elite special forces mindset. And, you know, you look at Navy SEALs, it's for the last, 50, 60 years, have only ever had a 20% success rate of graduation. And no matter how much money, no matter how much research, no matter how much they try and, you know, break down and look at it, but they've identified that there's one key element. You probably know the answer to this already. They've identified one key trait that is a difference between, you know, someone actually graduating from Navy SEALs, or in some cases becoming a professional athlete, and not. And they've identified that as grit, and that is the ability to deal with pain for extended periods of time when others can't. Now, I guess that begs the question, like, is grit something that we can teach? Because grit and anxiety, man, best friend. If you can develop grit and you've got anxiety, then you're setting yourself up for a high level of success.
Yes.
So, what is grit from a psychological perspective?
Well, I guess from where I'm at with endurance runners, it's mental toughness, and you're talking really about the same thing, that idea of grit. And what I'm looking at and what I'm interested in is, when we talk about pain in particular, it's not just a visceral sensory experience of pain, but it's how they experience pain and how a Navy SEAL experiences pain. And it's not just physical, it's cognitive as well. So the meaning they attach to pain is very different to the way someone who's avoided discomfort and pricks their finger and I think
it's fair to interject here and say, well, okay, so what does anxiety mean? Because oftentimes we look at anxiety and go, this is a bad thing, but we can actually look at the balance and go, well, there's actually an equal and opposite meaning, which is also good if we're willing to dig.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I think those experiences of pain and grit, I think is absolutely fascinating, and we don't really know. That's the answer from a psychological point of view. If we knew, and you know, I know there's researchers over in the States when it comes to endurance runners and athletes, they're doing the same thing, and they're working with the military and working out how to kind of train the brain to do endurance stuff like that. So it's a work in progress. Fascinating field, but I would have to say one of the factors, if you look at it in terms of it's the meaning you attach to pain, where does that experience, that interpretation come from? I think a lot of it's upbringing. And I think, unfortunately, you look at sort of children that are raised in environments where they're never allowed to be well, they're not allowed to, but they're not upset ever. They don't know how to self-soothe. Mum holds their hand to, you know, pat them to sleep. And even when they're teenagers, you know, oh no, we don't want them upset. So, you know, if you raise your children to avoid pain and to kind of rescue them all the time, they don't have that grit. They just don't have it. Whereas I think the kids that have to sort of dig deep and, you know, learn from it and grow through it, I think they're often the ones that end up being able to deal with it better.
Do you mind a bit of controversy?
No.
Because I've got a fascination with addiction. Okay, I'm an addict.
Yes.
But I've been reading a lot of the most current research around how the brain maladapts based on its environment. When kids are actually put in high stress environments, okay, and they don't have the ability to have someone, because most kids, and this is what I've just learned, they don't know how to self-soothe. It's not an inherent trait.
That's right.
It's something that they learn through the contact of a parent. And I think one of the challenges we have, and because I was one of these people who was brought up, you know, I was spanked as a child and grew up with this condition called respect for my elders, and I used to totally buy into that. And then I had a son, and then I started to realise, oh shit! And I started thinking about all the ways that I was disciplined. And I started, you know, visualising that on him, and I was like, "There's no way I could do that. I just can't." And it's not to say, and then this is not to diminish mum. It's okay. It's not to diminish mum or dad, but it's just to say they did the best that they could with the tools that they had at the time. But what I've now learnt through my own condition of addiction is, you know, I didn't learn how to regulate stress as a child because I wasn't shown how to regulate stress in a healthy way, and as a result, my brain developed in a different way, which made me more susceptible to ADHD, which made me more susceptible to you know, the moment I experienced a substance that took the anxiousness away. I was like, oh, so this is what it's like to feel normal. And that's where I kind of, you know, I chime in there because it's interesting where when my son was first born, was like, you know, if he was having a meltdown, my first response was, if he wasn't getting his own way and he was having a meltdown, my response to my wife was, look, he's got to learn. And thank God for her, you know, intuitive wisdom. She's like, no, he needs to be nurtured. And that's what I learned through my own experiences. When our children are breaking down, we're not there to teach them a lesson. We're there to make them feel safe, because they need to feel safe in a high stress environment, because they don't know how to regulate their own emotions.
That's it, yeah. But I think there's a happy medium though. You know, I think that there are two extremes. I guess one extreme
100%.
is not nurturing and, you know, letting them just go through it. The other extreme is colluding with that avoidance, I guess. And I guess that's what I mean. I think, you know, there are a lot of kids that have been overprotected, and I'm not going to say over nurtured, because nurturing is beautiful. You've got to nurture your kids.
You can never love a child too much.
Never. But I think, you know, if I look at the lifelong lessons that I learned, you know, you go through tough times, you know, you fail an exam and you have to suck it up, but you can do it in a way where you're nurtured at the same time and you're taught those skills. Because you're right, we're not born knowing how to put ourselves to sleep. You know, as a parent, you know, when you've got an infant, you don't just sort of put them down and let them, you know, some would say you do, but I would argue you don't just let them scream. You've got to teach them though. The worst
thing. That's what the science is telling us. When we do let them scream, they're literally living in a high. They're not learning how to regulate stress.
No, well, and little babies. I mean, we're talking about babies, and you can't teach a newborn to self-soothe. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, 100% right.
Yeah.
So grit, it's something that we still don't know how to teach. But what's interesting, because when we look at this as a discipline, and again, because I think grit and discipline are intrinsically linked. I think the more discipline and the more structure that we have as children, the easier it is for us to apply ourselves to situations that are uncomfortable for extended periods of time. It was actually I said this in the last interview as well. I think it was Forbes magazine, 1992. They did a study of the top 5% of CEOs in Fortune 500 companies going back like 50 years, and they discovered 3 common patterns. They either had a background in elite sports or professional sports, a background in military, or a background in martial arts, which it's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
But it also is the advocate for structure.
Yeah.
It is also the advocate for discipline. And because I think oftentimes in life, most people want to be free, and free is I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, which is, you know, the ultimate, my path to addiction was doing whatever I want, whenever I wanted, led to me just doing things that I perhaps shouldn't have.
Yeah.
So how important, when it comes to dealing with anxiety, because oftentimes anxiety can be triggered from things that aren't expected, beyond our control. How important is structure and discipline in a life to help minimise, or in most cases, better be able to deal with things like anxiety and stress?
I think it's important, but I think we also have to have flexibility as well. And I think sometimes with anxiety, it can come from actually being too rigid with that stuff as well. So, you know, that's the other side of it.
A level of OCD.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've got my structure and I've got my routine, and if anything messes with it, then I'm just going to go mental and have a breakdown. So I think we've got to have that flexibility. And part of it's about being realistic with the structure as well. I think I was just talking to some of your beautiful staff before about the idea of busyness. You know, we have this kind of idea that we've got to be busy all the time, and that's a status symbol. But that's actually just fosters and feeds anxiety and stress. You know, that idea that I've got to be doing something all the time because I'm constantly seeking validation to feel good about myself means that, you know, you just don't know how to be still, and you don't know how to just sit with your own thoughts. And that's a problem as well. So I think structure is important, and I think having boundaries is crucial in anything. So, which involves saying no sometimes, which I guess the people I see have the biggest problem saying no. They can't. People that have anxiety tend to be givers. They tend to put their needs last all the time, generally. So, you know, I often see people who are constantly focused on doing everything else, whether it's kids, whether it's husband, and then at the end of the day, they're left frazzled with kind of nothing left, no fuel in the tank at the end of the day. So, yes, structure is important, but I think we just need to be mindful that we're not over-structuring our life, and that we do have that flexibility to kind of change if life throws a curveball, which it always will.
So dealing with anxiety, dealing with stress, first thing is sit with it. Sit with the pain, sit with the discomfort, and then start looking at the origin. Where's this coming from? Is it practical? Is it impractical? Is there a physiological, is there anything we can do like physiologically, mentally, with our body or our minds to actually help learn how? Because for me, again, and it's kind of interesting, the path that I've taken now in business, for the last 15 years, I've been on this passion to learn how to regulate and teach how the regulation of emotions and stress. Because for the longest time, I didn't think it was possible. But what I'm curious to know from your perspective is, how do we teach someone how to regulate because anxiety, when it's impractical, prevents us from doing what we need to do. So what can we do as a human being in a moment where, okay, I'm anxious, I know where it's coming from, what do I do next? How do I regulate in a more efficient, effective way?
I think one of the most important things that we all should do is watch our internal dialogue, because that by far is the most powerful thing. The little things that we say to ourselves, which are often we're unaware. So switch on the light bulb, actually pay attention to that inner dialogue. One of the things I say to my people I say is, how would you talk to a friend in that situation? Because look at how you're talking to yourself. you're being a complete bitch to yourself.
Abusive.
You're being nasty.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say, I told you you'd fail at that. You're hopeless. Why can't you get that right? You can't do anything right. That's the language and the stuff that we say to ourselves. So I think paying close attention to your inner dialogue and actually balancing it out. I know mantras are, a bit cliched, and I don't believe in just having mantras for the sake of having a mantra, but I do think creating a more helpful inner dialogue, and sometimes you have to construct that in order for it to then become automatic.
And inner dialogue is self-hypnotic suggestions.
Yeah.
Like it's what we're suggesting ourselves on a regular basis becomes deeply embedded in our subconscious.
That's right. So even saying things to yourself like, it's okay. It's okay to feel like this. It's okay. Oh, so what? That's all right. But try harder next time. And I think sport, that plays out in, unbelievably. I've just started doing triathlons, and the amount of times through a race that you kind of think, I can't do this. And if you pay attention to that and you think, no, I can, but it's okay to think that, because that's a normal thought process. It's just a thought. Just because I think I can't do it doesn't mean I can't do it. It's not a fact. Exactly. It's just a thought. So once you start creating some separation between your thoughts and your reactions, and you do that by paying attention to them, then you've got more power to choose how to respond. Do I put my hand up and get the lifeguard to come and rescue me? Or do I suck it up and say, no, keep going. You're not going to drown. It's all right.
Yeah.
So,
I've got a couple of questions that I love to ask myself when I'm in a high stress, high anxiety situation, which is, the first one is, what is the benefit of this? Yeah. And actually, and at first, and when I first started, it was like, there's no fucking benefit. This is horrible. But what I've discovered is over time, you start to realize that there are benefits of stress. There are benefits of anxiety. You just have to be willing to seek. Now, how is this serving me in this moment right now? And what tools does this give me that I didn't have yesterday that will allow me to move forward faster than it was yesterday, tomorrow? Yeah. And I find personally, this, by being able to balance the equation, because like you say, if the inner dialogue is all negative, it just amplifies and becomes a symbiotic amplification. Whereas if we can just balance our psychology and look at, okay, I know I'm very clear on all the bad stuff, but let's balance this out with a bit of good stuff as well. Yeah. Our mind can wrap around, and start to equalise itself. Yep. But is there anything we can do with our physiology? Physically, what can we do in those moments, to help calm and regulate the body down? So obviously in those moments, your cortisol levels are through the roof. So, you've got blood sugar running through your cells. Cortisol tells your liver and your muscles to release glucose into the bloodstream. It's preparing for a fight or flight. So physiologically... Which is destroying testosterone. It's destroying estrogen. Yeah, totally. It inhibits our digestion, makes us... We lose about 30 to 40, 50% of our IQ in 7 minutes. Yeah, let's talk about elevated cortisol. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's just, it's terrible. So, that's right. So, they say deep breathing. Oh, yeah, deep breathing. But what you're doing by deep breathing is you're regulating your oxygen levels. Often when we're anxious, we hyperventilate. We don't know it, but our breathing, we're not breathing from the diaphragm. So focusing on your breathing, it does two things. It regulates your oxygen levels, but it gives you something to focus on that's present and in the now. Mindful, Oh, totally, Look, and I think that's gonna do one thing. I think actually doing something for your muscles as well, I think is relaxing. But I think when you've got that elevated cortisol and that agitation that goes with it, you can't just relax. I find that the only way I can do that is if I go for a run, jump on the spot. I don't know, do whatever you can that's physical to get the heart rate up, even if it's just for 5 minutes, then relax, because you've got to burn off all that adrenaline and all that cortisol. The worst thing you can say to someone that's stressed, relax. I was just about to, I'm so glad you went there. I was like, literally, that is the trigger for high five in the face with a chair. It's Okay, so you've gone where I was going to go. The biochemical, because the biochemical response of stress, the biochemical response of anxiety, it's incredibly destructive. Yeah, it is. Yeah, and then it's amplified when we soothe with things like alcohol. We soothe with things like drugs, because all that does is compound what we're experiencing. So I'm curious to know if there is perhaps some supplementation that some people can take that can perhaps support high stress, high anxiety, environments and people that are perhaps a little bit more susceptible. Yeah, look, I mean, things like, B complex vitamins and things like that have always been known to, I guess, be useful and beneficial for chronic anxiety. Look, I actually think that... I think when our cortisol levels are high, blood sugar, all that kind of thing, we have a desire to eat sugar. And I guess when we're physiologically feeling anxious, I guess the other main thing we should be able to do is say, what can I do that's actually good for my body right now? And I think good nutrition is crucial when it comes to that. Well, I was actually going to go there next after supplementation. Yeah. Is there a link, and have there been thousands, if not hundreds of studies already linked to poor nutrition and higher levels of stress and anxiety.
Yeah, but it's difficult to know which direction the relationship is.
Yep.
You know, sometimes is it the fact that we're anxious that we then are eating not so good, or is it the, you know, who knows?
Oh my God, I just ate a donut. I haven't had a donut in a month. Now I'm going to hell and I'm going to be fat tomorrow.
That's it. But I think if we've got that kind of, we can almost call it can become like a pre-metabolic issue where we've got elevated cortisol, which obviously leads to kind of weight gain, testosterone through the floor, forget it, all that kind of thing. Then we need to look after our hormones, and I think that's really important. So eating kind of foods that are alkalizing, that are soothing, your fibre, that kind of thing, whole grains, lots of the stuff that we know really. I mean, it's not rocket science. Leafy greens, fresh fruit and vegetables, foods that aren't processed. That's the stuff that's going to, you know, really look after our gut, because with chronic stress and high cortisol comes chronic inflammation because our immune system's suppressed. So that chronic inflammation can often mean that we don't have the right gut bacteria. So when we're eating foods that are processed, which is okay sometimes, but in those moments, that stuff might have we might have issues with that stuff. It might actually leak and cause all sorts of problems. So we need to look after our gut. So I'm a big fan of probiotics. There's no real solid research that links, you know, the taking of probiotics to reduce stress and that kind of thing. But I personally swear by them. So, you know, I think if you've got good probiotics and prebiotics and you're eating well, that should protect your gut.
One question, a little bit off topic here. How is it that when I eat 200 grams of chocolate that I put on at least 1 kilo?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a bit random.
That's a bit weird.
Yeah, I know. I've never been able to work that one out. But I'm curious. Yeah, I always want to know. Okay, I've been fasting for about almost 18 years now. I started off doing the long, the 7 to 10 day water fast with the calorics and everything else. And in the last couple of years, I've transitioned into the intermittent fasting schedules, which has been, shown to increase inflammation, decrease inflammation, increase, hormone levels to stabilize. So what's your experience with using something like intermittent fasting as a lifestyle? Because again, this isn't about a diet.
This
is the biggest challenge.
Yep.
And again, the reason I got into intermittent fasting is because I'd go and do these 7 to 10 day water fasts once or twice a year. I'd go and I'd drop 10 kilos on a water fast. I'd come back and spend the next 6 months putting it back on again. And although I'd feel great, but then there were these periods, there was a lot of stress to put on the body. Now I'm intermittent fasting. I'm the lowest weight. I'm basically my 14-year-old weight. But I feel like my 7-year-old self. But what's interesting is I've literally had injuries that I've had for 15, 20 years spontaneously heal. Conditions that I've had for a decade or more just spontaneously disappear. But I am curious to know your opinion on intermittent fasting as a lifestyle, not as a treatment, and its effects on things like anxiety and stress and body health.
I do it too. I do the 16-8.
Do you really?
Yes, I do. Yeah, okay. Both my husband and I do. So Monday to Friday, I don't eat until 1. And then I don't eat anything after 9.
I knew you were cool.
And you know what? I did it as an experiment because I knew there was so much research in favour of it, and initially I thought, oh, another diet, that's ridiculous. You've got to have breakfast and it's the most important meal of the day and all that kind of stuff.
Such a crock of shit.
If you look at the Australian dietary guidelines, it'll tell you you've got to have breakfast, you've got to do this, that and the other, and it's good for your metabolism, blah, blah, blah. And I believed that. I believed that for so long. That's what doctors are taught. That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, doctors aren't taught about nutrition.
No. Or 15 minutes. There's a 15-minute workshop.
That covers it, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So
because good health and nutrition and good health is not linked with disease.
No, not at all.
Not based on
you can eat McDonald's and be fine.
Exactly. That's what I thought. Yeah.
I don't want to demonise McDonald's though.
Why?
Because I don't demonise anything.
Okay, fair enough. I love your balance.
My kids have McDonald's. God damn it. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. What were we talking about?
Oh, it's fucking good. Intermittent fasting.
Oh, yeah. No, I do it too. The 16-8. So, how long have I been? My husband does it as well. We've been doing it for about a month. Now, my husband is exceptionally fit, but just he's, unfortunately, he's got high cholesterol and his parents have. It's a genetic thing, Exactly. Yeah. So I've just had my bloods done. My cholesterol's been quite high as well. So I'm interested to kind of see. I can't absorb B12 very well. I've been low on iron, all that kind of stuff. I was diagnosed as latent celiac several years ago.
Okay.
I've just had my celiac immunology just done again. So I'm really interested to see what happens, but I feel great. I actually feel great. You
will feel the most your body will respond is at about probably want to know is about the 3-month mark once you become fat adapted.
Yep.
We've got most of our clients on the intermittent fasting schedule. I do it as a lifestyle now, as I have been for about 2 years. I do the 24, so I'm normally, and sometimes I'll just do the 23-1. Like sometimes I'll eat once a day, at least twice a week I'll eat once a day. The balance of the time I'll eat maybe 2 times a day between 4 and 8. And then 1 day a week I'll do what's called a refeed, where I'll basically just eat whatever the fuck I want, donuts, pizza, ice cream, you name it. But what's interesting is I always wake up leaner the next day after my refeed, which is interesting. But more energy, but when we look at anxiety, like are there any links between anxiety, stress, and the benefits of fasting and what we get from it?
I think there'd be definitely at least an indirect link, because I think that, the fasting has been shown to decrease cellular inflammation, and we know that inflammation and stress are like the same thing. So I think I feel calmer, I have to say, and it's only early days for me, and maybe it's placebo, I don't know, but I generally feel like I can think a bit clearer. I now train without eating. I used to the first few times I went to train, I died. I could not do it. I'd get halfway through my set and think, oh, this is ridiculous. Now I don't even think about it. But I think certainly.
But have you seen also the data that they've been using intermittent fasting now as treatment for early onset Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and the results they've been getting has been incredible.
Well, you think about it. If we're constantly eating, our body does nothing but digest food 24/7, except for when we're asleep. But it's still working hard, obviously. So I think by giving the body a break from digesting food, which let's face it, it's hard work. Digesting proteins is horrendous. The poor body has to take every single amino acid apart and rebuild it into something it can use. It's, the energy that we use digesting food, I think we forget how tough that is on the body. So by just giving the body a break from that means that it can put all its energy towards healing, towards rejuvenation, towards all of that recovery, all that kind of stuff that it doesn't really have time to do else, when we're eating all the time. So, in saying it that way, it kind of makes common sense. But I don't think there are any direct studies now that have come out yet to kind of show, but I would say it's a matter of time. And I think, at least we can sort of say there's definitely got to be some sort of link somewhere.
Yeah, and we can see the popularity of it growing. It is going to become, as far as I'm concerned, the number one anti-aging tool, which is going to make it sexy, because obviously that's what people want. Because yes, feeling well and everything else is grand, but looking younger is obviously the thing that people want.
We've got to just take it away from the whole diet mentality, and that's the thing. It's not a diet. Lifestyle. My in-law said to me, "Why are you skipping breakfast? You don't need to lose weight." I said, "No. I'm eating the same amount of calories. Exactly the same amount of calories. I'm just eating them within a different window. That's all I'm doing." So I think we've got to get our mind around the fact that it isn't a diet. I'm not skipping a meal. I'm just choosing my window of when I eat my calories.
Life. I think often in life, because obviously a lot of the areas that we work in, specifically our business, and people treat their business, people treat success in business like a fucking diet or like an event. They'll work on their business to make it more successful, maybe once, a fortnight a weekend every month. Most people treat their relationship like it's an event. Say that. They may be, which leads to, in most cases, no one doing anything about their business until the creditors are at the door. Most people are not doing anything about their relationship. Their partner's about to walk out. Whereas when we can actually make this a way of life, this is how we show up every day. It's no longer, I'm not trying to lose weight. My body just does it naturally. I'm not trying to create more energy. My body just does it naturally.
Well, exercise is the same thing, isn't it? People that kind of impose exercise programs onto their lifestyle and think it's going to stick, and it just doesn't. You've actually got to integrate it and make it a part of it. So it's a similar kind of thing. It's got to just become habit. And
so we touched on mindfulness earlier, and it's linked to being able to effectively regulate and treat things like stress and anxiety. But what's your experience? Do you have any experience with mindfulness or meditation and using that as another tool to help regulate?
I'm not very good at it. I think that's what my direct experience is. I'm pretty bad at it a lot of the time. I try, and I have. I guess consciously I have moments where I run, and I guess that's when I'm mindful.
That's a form of meditation.
Yeah, and I use that now as a form of mindfulness. At least one run a week for me now is, I call it a chi run, because it's a bit of a Tai Chi focus I have on that run. And it's where I couldn't give a stuff about my pace, don't care at all. All I'm focusing on is my core and being relaxed, and my posture and my breathing and the sounds and sensations of where I am. That's all I think about. So I think probably for me to actually just sit and be mindful, I find really challenging. So, but if I'm integrating it in an activity that I'm doing, like running, cooking is another one. I can sometimes, except when the kids are around me, and, I'm hungry. But if not, if I've actually got the kitchen to myself, that's another place that I can actually practice it. So I think for people that find it difficult, I think a lot of people turn their nose up at mindfulness and say, I can't just think of nothing. It's not about that anyway. It's actually about focusing on something.
Yeah.
But you're being present. That's the key. So, so I often say to people, don't worry if you can't sit still and be mindful, or take a nice bubble bath and be mindful. I mean, that'd be great. But for most of us, we need to attach it to an activity so that we're actually putting our mind somewhere.
And also having realistic expectations about the practice itself. Because, I've been meditating now for almost, probably 18 years, 20 years. And one of the things that I've learned when I first started meditating, I'm ADHD, like I'm high level ADHD. And my mind is, they have the monkey mind, but they call my mind the gorilla in a china shop, dose up on crack and cocaine. Like, he's wild. And so for me, I had the same talk track. I'm not good at meditation. I can't do meditation. But what I realized is by focusing, and I'm talking for an extended period of time, all of a sudden the muscles started to develop, and then when the muscle becomes strong, it becomes a lot easier to lift the weight that we're dealing with.
Very true.
But what's also interesting, which I've learned, because I was meditating very heavily last year. I was going through separation with my wife and a lot of stress going on. So I was in some days I was meditating 3 and 4 hours a day, and that wasn't all in one go. Like, I'd do an hour in the morning, I'd do half hour in the car on the way to work, half in the car on the way home, an hour with my son in the evening. But then towards the end of the year, life got a little bit busy, and I stopped meditating, and it was almost like I went back to start meditating again mid-January, and I was like, shit, I've only stopped. It's like fitness. I only stopped training for 6 weeks, and I feel like I haven't meditated in my whole life again.
Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge for some people to have these unrealistic expectations of what meditation should give them in the period of time that it does.
Yeah, and that they should be able to sit and do an hour. I mean, if you're starting out, there's no way. I mean, you've got to build up to that.
Exactly.
So I think you're right. I think people think, I'll spend the first hour of the day doing this.
Yeah.
I can't sit and do that for an hour. If you've got to start with 5 minutes, you start with 5 minutes.
Beautiful.
So, you're right. I think with that kind of stuff too, we've got to let our mind go where it's going to go. Once you start judging your thoughts in that process too.
And that's half the point. I think half the point of meditation is realising that distraction is there, but the key is becoming aware of when the distraction is there, so that we
and not judging it.
And bingo, not judging it as something that's bad.
Yeah. Oh, we judge our thoughts all the time. It's terrible. See, I just did it then.
I was say, stop judging me. Because I know if you're judging you, you're judging me. Okay, cool. So obviously you've and again, one of the reasons I was really excited to speak to you, Leanne, was the fact that you do work on the mind, you do work on the body, and you do work on the nutrition as well. So when it comes to making the mind and the body and nutrition something that it is a way of life for someone who maybe experiences high levels of stress, high levels of anxiety, they don't have the best diet, they don't hydrate very well, they think shitty thoughts. Where do we start?
Start small.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I say people that will say, all right, that's it, I need to stop eating sugar, I'm going to quit smoking, I'm going to do this, I'm joining boot camp, and I think, stop, that's all wonderful, but it's too much. So if you can do one thing each week or one thing each day that is actually aligned with where you see your healthy self. So I think we've got to start with an image of what does my healthy self look like?
And a realistic goal.
Exactly, yeah. And we need to put that image in our head of that person. And we need to have a healthy relationship with that person. So once we've got that goal and once we know where we're going, we've just got to step through it and be patient, I think, and not expect results, really, really fast. I think, like I said, one small thing each day, and that could be a phone call to a gym, or not even a gym, but it could be I'm going to send my friend an email to see if they're interested in doing parkrun with me, or I'm going to, I don't know, it can be something tiny. It can be I'm actually going to go and buy that book that I've been wanting to get, or I'm actually going to have a green tea today. I've never tried green tea. I'm actually going to, something good for my body and something good for me. We've got to start switching that internal dialogue to being a nurturing one and a self-care one.
Yeah.
And sometimes starting with the head can be a bit more difficult. So start with the body, book into that massage, book into that pedicure, book in to get your hair done.
One of the things that I see in business, but also in life, because again, I love business, that's our core, but I just love performance. I love people, well-being and, being able to express greater life, levels of life. But patience seems to be something that is lacking in so many people, and everybody wants everything right now. So when we talk about managing the perspective, how can we manage the perspective when we have these? If someone's identifying, I constantly set unrealistic goals. Okay, how do I start small? Like, if I'm going to start small in my head or with my body, I can go and get a massage. But how do I start small in my head?
Yeah, well, I think you've got to pay attention to what you're already doing, I guess, and where you might be going wrong with that kind of stuff. You know, if you're, let's just say you've got the idea in your head that you want to do a startup business and you want to be earning X, you know, that's great. But, you know, you've sort of got to sit down and maybe look at people that have done that and start to kind of understand what's involved, and rather than just kind of think you're going to achieve it in a week, to really sit down and deconstruct it and actually work out the steps that it's going to take to get there. I think we're all very good at sometimes coming up with, you know, kind of goals. I want to lose 20 kilos. But we don't necessarily sit down and work out realistically what is involved in that and how do I do that in a way
and also
that's
how much
healthy.
stress that can create. Because I see this in business. People start a business and I say, okay, when do you start? Oh, I started 2 weeks ago. Okay, what's your goal? I want to make $1 million in the next 12 months. I'm like, dude, you've got a recipe for fucking pain right there. It takes the average business from startup at least 10 years to make $1 million. But in the first 5 years, 96% will fail. And in the 10 years, you know, 98.2% will fail. So, you know, you're setting yourself up for a lot of stress there. And I think this is a really important point to talk to, because again, we're talking about stress and anxiety and, you know, learning how to reduce it. But I think sometimes we actually amplify it by setting ourselves these unrealistic goals. And so I think you make some really good points there. Start like 20 kilos, unrealistic, but maybe I'm not going to lose 20 kilos. Maybe I'm going to go for a 20-minute walk 3 times a week. And
20 kilos is realistic if you want to do it in 12 months.
Bingo.
So I think sometimes educating yourself and talking to people that know about it. And in business, same thing. You know, I mean, I would think one of the keys to successful business is surrounding yourself with the right people.
Exactly.
So if you're surrounding yourself...
living the lifestyle that you want to live.
That's right.
And I'm not talking about the high life. I'm talking about the work ethic, the work required.
Very much. And you learn from those people and you leave yourself open to being wrong. I think that's another thing, you know.
Oh, how good is... my ex-wife would completely disagree with what I'm about to say now, but I love being wrong because every time I'm wrong, I fucking learn something new. And I think we're on this planet to learn as much as possible. And I think the more we can embrace failure, and again, stress, anxiety, what is our relationship with failure? Because I think oftentimes people look at failure, it's bad, it's wrong, it's something that should be avoided. It's like, no, you're missing the point. You know, success creates blunt instruments. Failure is what makes us sharp. And I think we should probably all learn how to embrace failure a little bit better, which again comes down to exactly what you said. What does it mean? What's going on? What is our relationship with it?
And learning your own strengths. And I think, you know, I look back at my son does little athletics and, you know...
So does mine. How old's yours?
8.
Oh, mine's 4.
It's great. It's a great sport. But it's for kids to learn that, no, you didn't get an award today. They got an award because they did a PB, but that's okay, you know. Or, yes, he's really good at the 100-metre sprint, but look how good you are at discus, you know. Right. So I think for kids to kind of understand that they don't have to be good at everything and that there are going to be kids better than them at everything in life, but that doesn't mean that you're a failure. So I think teaching them that kind of resilience as well, and I think resilience is a buzzword. You might be crap at sport, but you might have a wicked sense of humour, you know, like, So I think
I lucked out on all that. But anyway, Leanne Hall, this has been an absolute pleasure. For people who want to find out more about, you've written a book, right?
I have written a book, yes.
What's it called?
Head First, Health Fast.
Yeah, I like that.
Smart approach to outwitting body issues and achieving sustainable health. It's such a mouthful, I always forget it. It's bad, isn't it?
No, it's fantastic. But that's why I got you to say it. So if people want to find out more about the book or find out more about you, where's the best place I can go?
Probably my website, which is just leannehall.com.au.
Fantastic.
Easy.
Leanne Hall, you're amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This episode was brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for business. There you have it, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Unstoppable with me, your host, Kerwin Ray. And please do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you get to see all of these interviews in the flesh. Share this podcast with your friends and drop me a review on iTunes. I would love to hear what you guys think, and also let you know that your comments help make sure that we keep producing killer content just like this. And if you'd like to stay up to date with all of my movements, upcoming podcasts, events, and much more, please jump onto the website kerwinray.com and also check us out on all social media on the handle @KerwinRay. Thanks for joining us.